The great hall of Shadowmere Castle thrummed with anticipation and judgment. Torchlight danced across the stone walls that had witnessed centuries of choosings, each flame casting writhing shadows that seemed alive with malice. Lyricel kept her gaze fixed downward, studying the worn flagstones beneath her feet. She had memorized every crack, every stain, every imperfection during the endless wait. Around her, silk rustled against leather, wine splashed into goblets, and whispers slithered through the crowd like serpents. "Presenting the ward of Lord Maldrake," the herald announced, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of court protocol, though contempt bled through at the edges. Lyricel of House Blackmore. The fabricated surname was her uncle's invention, a thin veneer of respectability over her true namelessness. No lineage, no pack standing, just a silent girl whose very existence was considered a stain on the bloodline. Maldrake's fingers dug into her shoulder, propelling her forward with calculated force. She stumbled slightly but recovered, denying the crowd their entertainment. She could feel hundreds of eyes upon her, some pitying, most dismissive, all measuring her worth and finding her wanting. The choosing ceremony occurred once each season when unmated alphas gathered to select brides from eligible women across the 7 territories. For most, it represented hope, a chance at power, protection, and purpose. For Lyricel, it was her uncle's final attempt to extract value from his worthless investment. She was silent, a condition rarer than white wolves and far less valued. Born without voice, she had never uttered a sound. Not a cry at birth, not a whisper in childhood, not even a scream when her uncle's lessons grew harsh. The healers claimed her vocal cords were intact, that the silence ran deeper than flesh. Perhaps a curse, perhaps a defect of the soul itself. Lord Maldrake stepped forward, adopting the obsequious tone he reserved for those who outranked him. "Your Majesty," he began, executing a bow precisely calibrated to show respect without groveling. "I present my late sister's daughter. Though the moon goddess has seen fit to withhold the gift of speech, she possesses other qualities. Her hands are skilled with herbs and letters. Her temperament is docile. She would serve well in a household requiring discretion." The words stung more than blows. He was selling her like livestock, emphasizing her utility while acknowledging her deficiency. Several younger alphas near the platform exchanged amused glances, their interest already waning. Lyricel finally raised her eyes, not to the leering crowd, but to the figure who dominated the hall from his obsidian throne. King Calethorn commanded attention without effort. He was winter given form, sharp cheekbones carved from pale marble, black hair that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, eyes the color of storm clouds pregnant with lightning. Power radiated from him in waves that made lesser wolves instinctively bare their throats. But there was something else, something wrong. The air around him seemed to shimmer with cold, and frost patterns traced delicate fractals across his throne's armrests where his hands rested. The creeping shadow. She had heard whispers of the curse that plagued the royal bloodline, a magical affliction that slowly transformed emotion into ice, warmth into winter, until only a frozen husk remained. Looking at him now, she could see its mark, the subtle gray tinge to his skin, the unnatural stillness of his breathing, the way shadows seemed to pool beneath his feet despite the torchlight. His gaze swept over her with clinical detachment, pausing for perhaps 2 heartbeats before moving on. In that brief moment, she felt evaluated and dismissed, categorized and forgotten. He gestured with one finger. "Proceed." A younger alpha with more ambition than sense stepped forward, his patchy beard failing to disguise his youth. 5 gold coins, he offered, the insultingly low bid drawing snickers from his companions. 3 gold coins, another called out mockingly. For a mute bride, that seems generous. What use is a mate who cannot sing to her pups? The first alpha continued, warming to his theme. Who cannot call her husband home from the hunt? She's not a woman. She's furniture with a pulse. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Maldrake's jaw clenched, watching his already meager prospects dwindle. He had hoped for at least enough gold to cover his gambling debts. An older alpha, scarred from battles and bearing the crude humor of military camps, pushed forward. His eyes raked over Lyricel with undisguised hunger. Perhaps her mouth has other uses, he said, with a leer that made her stomach turn. Silent wives can't complain about their duties, after all. The hall erupted in coarse laughter. Lyricel felt herself shrinking inward, her spirit curling into a protective ball against the casual cruelty. She had endured years of her uncle's contempt, survived the isolation of her condition, but this public humiliation cut deeper than she expected. Then the temperature plummeted. The laughter died instantly. Breath misted in the suddenly frigid air. The scarred alpha's grin froze on his face as every eye turned to the throne. Calethorn hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but his displeasure was a living thing that pressed against everyone present. Ice spread from his throne in crystalline patterns, crackling across the stone platform. The scarred alpha dropped to one knee, then to both, his head bowed so low it nearly touched the floor. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," he gasped, his voice strangled with fear. The king's attention returned to Lyricel, and this time his gaze lingered. She felt it like a physical touch, cold fingers tracing her features, peering past her shabby dress and downcast posture to something deeper. A strange sensation bloomed in her chest. Recognition, perhaps, or something more primal. Her inner wolf, usually dormant and disconnected from her voiceless existence, stirred with interest. "Is there any serious claim for this woman?" Calethorn's voice was deep and rhythmic, like distant thunder or ice cracking on a frozen lake. Silence stretched taut as a bowstring. No one dared bid after the king's display of displeasure. Lyricel stood abandoned in the center of the hall, unclaimed and unwanted. Maldrake's face flushed purple with rage and humiliation. He grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises, hissing in her ear, "Worthless creature. You've cost me everything. Tomorrow you go to the Scourlands. Let the exiles and madmen find use for you there." The Scourlands, a wasteland at the kingdom's edge where the banished scraped out brutal, short lives. It was a death sentence delivered slowly. She closed her eyes, accepting her fate with the same silence that had defined her existence. "I will take her." The words fell like hammer blows on an anvil, reshaping the world with their impact. Every head snapped toward the throne in perfect synchronization, as if pulled by invisible strings. The collective intake of breath created a sound like wind through empty halls. Lyricel's eyes flew open. Had she imagined it? But no. Calethorn was rising from his throne with fluid grace, each movement deliberate and predatory. He descended the platform steps, his black boots striking stone in a rhythm that matched her suddenly racing heart. The crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. Some pressed back against the walls, others dropped to their knees, all of them caught between awe and terror. The king rarely moved among them, preferring the isolation of his throne. To see him walking, claiming, choosing, it was unprecedented. Maldrake's grip on her arm loosened as greed overcame shock. His mind was already calculating, she could see it in his eyes. The king's interest could mean wealth, position, Power by association. Your Majesty, Maldrake began, his voice honey-sweet with avarice. What an unexpected honor. She will serve you faithfully, I assure you. Her silence makes her the perfect keeper of secrets, the ideal. Calethorn stopped 3 feet away, and Maldrake's words died in his throat. This close, the king's presence was overwhelming. The curse's touch was more visible. Thin veins of shadow traced beneath his skin like dark rivers, and his breath came out in visible puffs despite the hall's warmth. Yet beneath the supernatural cold, Lyricel sensed something else. Heat. Carefully controlled, deeply buried, but unmistakably present. State your terms, Calethorn said, addressing Maldrake without looking at him. His eyes remained fixed on Lyricel, studying her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and seen, truly seen, for the first time. That is, Maldrake stammered, caught off guard. The traditional bride price for a ward of noble blood would be Kaldros. The king's beta materialized from the shadows behind the throne, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man who anticipated his lord's needs. He carried a black leather pouch that hit the floor with a resounding thud when he dropped it at Maldrake's feet. 1,000 gold crowns, Kaldros announced in a flat tone, the price of a duke's daughter. Gasps echoed through the hall. It was an absurd sum for anyone, let alone a silent ward with no standing. Maldrake fell to his knees, scrambling to touch the pouch as if afraid it might vanish. Your Majesty's generosity knows no bounds, he babbled, clutching the gold to his chest. She is yours, completely and entirely yours. Calethorn extended his hand toward Lyricel, not a command, but an invitation. She stared at it, paralyzed by the moment's impossibility. His hand was large, elegant despite the calluses from swordwork, and she could see frost gathering on his palm like morning dew. To take it would change everything. To refuse would mean death. If not from the king's wrath, then from her uncle's retribution for costing him such a fortune. Yet neither consideration moved her to action. Instead, it was the look in Calethorn's eyes, a flicker of something beyond cold authority. Loneliness, perhaps, or recognition. Slowly, as if in a dream, she placed her small hand in his. The contact sent shockwaves through her entire being. His skin was ice cold, yes, but at the point where their palms touched, warmth bloomed. Not from him, but from her. It spread up her arm like golden honey, sweet and languid, and she saw his eyes widen fractionally. For one heartbeat, the gray storm clouds in his irises parted, revealing a flash of pure silver. Then his fingers closed around hers, firm but gentle, and the moment passed. He turned, leading her from the hall without another word. The crowd remained frozen, watching their king escort a nobody from their midst, as if she were precious beyond measure. Behind them, Lyricel heard Maldrake scrambling to secure his gold in Zerinthia's voice, sharp with indignation, demanding answers from her father. The corridors beyond the great hall were a labyrinth of cold stone and flickering shadows. Guards stood at attention as they passed, their eyes carefully averted. Servants pressed themselves against walls, bowing low. The castle was enormous, built to house armies, yet it felt empty, hollow, as if its very stones had absorbed centuries of loneliness. Calethorn's pace was measured, neither rushing nor dawdling. He had not released her hand, and that point of contact remained the only warm thing in the increasingly cold corridors. They climbed a spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever, passing levels that grew progressively quieter until the only sounds were their footsteps and her rapid breathing. Finally, they stopped before massive doors of black ironwood, carved with intricate patterns of thorned roses and howling wolves. Ancient runes were etched into the frame, glowing faintly with protective magic. "The Royal Library," Calethorn said, speaking for the first time since claiming her. "Sealed for 30 years, since my mother's death." Caldros stepped forward, producing an ornate key that looked older than the castle itself. The doors groaned open, releasing the scent of aged parchment, leather bindings, and something else. Magic, old and slumbering. Lyricel's breath caught. The library was not a room, but a world unto itself. The ceiling soared into darkness, supported by columns carved to look like ancient trees. Shelves stretched impossibly high, accessible only by rolling ladders and narrow walkways that spiraled up into shadow. Moonlight poured through a massive glass dome overhead, illuminating motes of dust that danced like tiny stars. Books. Thousands upon thousands of books. More than she had imagined existed in all the world. "This will be your domain," Calethorn said, finally releasing her hand. The loss of contact left her feeling oddly bereft. "You will catalog, preserve, and tend to this collection. These quarters," he gestured to a door barely visible behind a shelf, "will be yours. No one will disturb you here. No one but me." She turned to look at him, questions burning in her eyes. Why? Why her? Why this? He seemed to read her thoughts. "Your silence suits this place," he said carefully, as if selecting each word. "And I require someone who cannot spread the kingdom's secrets." It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the careful distance he now maintained between them. There was more. Something about that moment when they touched, about the way her warmth had pushed back his cold. Before she could attempt to communicate her understanding, a sharp voice cut through the sacred quiet. "So this is where you've hidden your new pet." Zorinthia stood in the doorway, resplendent in crimson silk that matched the anger in her eyes. She was everything Lyricel was not. Tall, commanding, beautiful in the way of sharpened blades. The Duke's daughter had been raised from birth to be a queen, and she wore that expectation like armor. "Lady Zorinthia." Calethorn's voice carried a warning that would have sent wise souls running. "You were not given permission to enter this wing." "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she said, with a curtsy that somehow managed to convey contempt. "I merely wish to understand what could possess you to pay a fortune for damaged goods." Her green eyes fixed on Lyricel with naked hatred. A mute cannot bear proper airs. She cannot perform the Queen's blessing at ceremonies. She cannot even scream when... Enough. The word carried such finality that ice literally formed on the windows. "Lyricel is under my protection. Any insult to her is an insult to the crown. Do you understand?" Zorinthia's face went pale, then flushed red. "She has a title now? This nothing?" "She is the keeper of royal archives," Calethorn said, each word precise as a blade strike. "A position that carries the rank of lesser nobility and the full protection of royal decree. Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or speaks ill of her in my presence will face the consequences. Have I made myself clear?" "Crystal, Your Majesty," Zorinthia whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. She swept another curtsy, this one properly respectful, before fleeing the library. Silence descended once more, but it was different now, charged with unspoken truths and impossible possibilities. Calethorn stood rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. The burst of protective fury had cost him. She could see new lines of frost spreading across his neck, the curse feeding on his emotional display. "Your duties begin tomorrow," he said formally, back to being the distant king. Rest tonight. Familiarize yourself with your surroundings. He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. You should know, he said without looking back, that I have extensive experience with curses. I know when someone carries magic they cannot speak. Another pause. Your secrets are safe here, Lyricel. As are you. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in a cathedral of books with 1,000 questions and the lingering warmth where his hand had held hers. The quarters attached to the library were modest but luxurious compared to her uncle's grudging accommodations. A proper bed with actual sheets, a writing desk positioned to catch morning light, a small hearth with wood already laid, and, most precious of all, a door with a lock she controlled. Lyricel explored her new domain as night deepened, running her fingers along ancient spines, breathing in the perfume of knowledge. She discovered sections devoted to history, mythology, healing arts, astronomical charts, and even forbidden texts, sealed behind glass cases marked with warning runes. In a corner partially hidden by shadow, she found something that made her heart stop. A section on genealogies and bloodlines, including several volumes on the Great Purge of 1247, her mother's death year. With trembling hands, she pulled out a leather-bound tome titled The Lost Lineages of the Seven Kingdoms. There, in faded ink, was the truth she'd been forbidden to speak. House Moonwood, the healers of the Silver Moon, blessed by the goddess with voices that could mend both body and soul. Hunted to extinction by King Malthorn the Cruel, Caelthorn's grandfather, who feared their power to undo the shadow magic his line had used to maintain dominance. But the book was wrong about one thing. They weren't extinct. One remained. Hidden behind a veil of silence her dying mother had woven with the last of her strength. Your true name is your death sentence, her mother had whispered, blood bubbling on her lips as assassin's poison worked through her veins. Speak it, and they will find you. Stay silent, stay hidden, stay alive. The magical vow had locked around her throat like a collar, sealing away not just her voice, but her very identity. To break it would require speaking her full name, Lyricel Moonwood, last heir of the Silver Throne, keeper of the healing song. And doing so would send a magical signal to every shadow-sworn assassin still hunting her bloodline. She closed the book carefully, mind racing. Caelthorn suspected she carried magic. He'd all but stated it. Yet he offered protection rather than persecution. Why? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a serving girl with a tray of food and a sealed letter. The girl curtsied and fled without waiting for a response she knew wouldn't come. The letter bore the royal seal. Inside, Caelthorn's precise handwriting. The collection requires significant restoration. Begin with the historical archives. You will find materials for cataloging in the desk drawers. Should you require anything, ring the bell by your door 3 times. I will visit periodically to review your progress. K'. Formal, distant. Yet he had taken the time to write personally rather than sending orders through Caldros. And the postscript, added in slightly less controlled handwriting. The books on the highest shelves contain my mother's personal collection. She would have wanted them cared for by someone who understands their value beyond mere words. Lyricel pressed the letter to her chest, feeling something shift inside her, a tiny crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. She worked through the night, setting up her cataloging system, organizing the chaos of decades of neglect. When exhaustion finally claimed her, she dreamed of silver light and winter eyes, of voices raised in healing song and shadows dancing with moonlight. She woke to find frost on her windows despite the spring warmth outside, and Calethorn standing in her doorway, watching her with an expression of such profound longing that her breath caught. "Forgive me," he said, stepping back. "I didn't mean to. I was checking the library's temperature. The preservation spells sometimes fail." A lie. They both knew it. He had been drawn here just as she felt drawn to him, two broken souls recognizing something in each other that defied explanation. She rose from her desk where she'd fallen asleep, ink staining her fingers, and gestured to the work she'd completed. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the neat stacks, the careful annotations, the system she'd developed. "You did all this in one night?" She nodded, then pointed to a specific section she'd set aside, books on curse-breaking and magical ailments. A question in the gesture. His face shuddered. "Those won't help. The creeping shadow isn't a normal curse. It's a bargain made in blood and shadow by my ancestor, passing from heir to heir. Each generation, it grows stronger. Each king, it claims faster." He turned away. "My father lived to 40 before it took him completely. I'm 28, and already." He didn't finish, but she could see the truth. The curse was accelerating. He had perhaps a year before it consumed him entirely. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers barely brushing his hand. The same warmth flowed between them, stronger this time, and she watched in amazement as the frost on his skin receded, the shadow veins fading slightly. He jerked away as if burned. "Don't," he said harshly. "Whatever you are, whatever magic you carry, don't waste it on me. I'm already lost." But his eyes betrayed him, hungry for that moment of warmth, desperate for the connection he'd just rejected. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she could feel the man still fighting beneath the curse's grip. But her silence held her trapped, and he fled before she could find another way to communicate the hope growing in her heart. Days settled into a rhythm. Lyricel rose with dawn, worked through the day organizing and cataloging, and prepared for Calethorn's nightly visits. He came like clockwork as the moon rose, drawn by something neither acknowledged aloud. At first, he maintained careful distance, reviewing her work with professional detachment, but gradually, inevitably, the space between them shrank. He began bringing his own work, kingdom correspondence, trade agreements, diplomatic papers, and settling into the large wingback chair by the fireplace while she worked nearby. They developed a language without words. A tilt of her head meant curiosity. A tap of his fingers indicated frustration with some political matter. She would bring him books she thought might help. Military strategies for border disputes, historical precedents for trade negotiations. He would leave small gifts, new ink, finer parchment, a blanket when the library grew cold. One evening, she found him slumped in his chair, the curse riding him hard. Shadow veins crawled up his neck like living things, and his breath came in pained gasps. Without hesitation, she knelt beside him, taking his hand between both of hers. "No," he growled, but didn't pull away. She focused everything she had into that touch. Not just warmth, but intention, pouring her will against the darkness eating at him. The silver light that had been caged inside her for so long pressed against its bonds, desperate to help, to heal. The shadows retreated gradually, like tide pulling back from shore. His breathing eased. When he opened his eyes, they were clearer than she'd ever seen them. "What are you?" he whispered. She couldn't answer, but she shaped the word with her lips. "Yours?" The admission hung between them, more binding than any spoken vow. He lifted his free hand to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "You don't understand," he said roughly. "My wolf It recognizes you. It calls you mate. But I can't. A king cannot take a mate he could destroy. The curse doesn't just affect me. It would spread to anyone I bonded with. She shook her head fiercely, squeezing his hand tighter. Her wolf, usually so quiet, howled its disagreement. The curse couldn't touch her. Her moonlight magic was its natural opposite. But she couldn't explain. Couldn't reveal the truth without dooming them both. Your torture, he confessed, his thumb still stroking her cheek. Every instinct screams to claim you, to keep you, to never let you go. But I see what this curse does. My father, he turned my mother to ice before the end. She died frozen from the inside out, calling for warmth that would never come. Tears ran down Lyricel's face. She understood now why the library had been sealed. It had been his mother's sanctuary, and he couldn't bear the reminder of what he'd lost, what he feared becoming. Don't cry for me, he said, though his own eyes were suspiciously bright. I chose to bring you here selfishly. Your presence, it quiets the curse somehow. Just being near you grants me peace I haven't known in years, but I won't let it claim you too. She wanted to scream that he was wrong, that her magic was specifically designed to counter his curse, that they were two halves of an ancient balance. Instead, she lifted his hand to her lips and kissed his palm. A promise, a claim, a rebellion against fate. He shuddered, and for a moment she thought he might give in, might pull her into his arms and damn the consequences. But his iron will reasserted itself. He stood, gently extracting his hand from hers. This cannot continue, he said, though the words seemed to pain him. I'll have Caldros handle the library reviews. You'll have everything you need, but I cannot return. He left, and the temperature dropped so drastically that ice formed on every surface. Lyricel hugged herself, feeling colder from his absence than from any supernatural chill. 3 days passed without sight of him. Caldros came instead, professionally distant, delivering supplies and checking her progress without comment. But she caught him watching her with something like pity. He's worse, the beta said finally, breaking his characteristic silence. The curse feeds on strong emotion, particularly denied desires. By staying away from you, he thinks he's protecting you, but he's killing himself faster. Lyricel grabbed parchment, writing frantically. There must be something we can do. Caldros read her message and shook his head. The curse is specific. Only his true mate could even attempt to break it, and the ritual requires... He paused, seeming to weigh his words. It requires absolute trust, perfect unity, and the speaking of binding vows. Even if he found his mate, how could he ask anyone to take such a risk? She wanted to write, I am his mate, but held back. Caldros was loyal to his king above all. If he thought she posed a danger, he'd remove her despite Calethorn's protection. That night she was pulled from sleep by an agonized howl that seemed to shake the castle's foundations. Without thinking, she ran barefoot through the corridors, following the sound to its source. She found chaos in the throne room. Guards stood frozen in terror as Calethorn writhed on the floor, more shadow than man. The curse had progressed dramatically. Half his body was translucent darkness, and ice spread from him in killing waves. Zerinthia stood nearby with several nobles, her face a mixture of fear and calculation. The king is dying, someone whispered. The shadow finally claims him. We must summon Lord Mortavius, Zerinthia said, louder than necessary. As High Counselor, he should oversee the transition of power. Lyricel didn't hesitate. She pushed through the frozen guards, ignoring their attempts to stop her, and threw herself to her knees beside Calethorn. His eyes were solid black, no trace of the man remaining. She grabbed his face between her hands, pouring every ounce of her suppressed magic into him. Silver light erupted from her palms, visible to everyone present. Gasps and cries of "witch" filled the air, but she didn't care. The shadows fought back, lashing at her with tendrils of pure darkness. They cut her arms, her face, seeking to drive her away. But she held on, stubborn and desperate, flooding him with moonlight. "Lyricel," he gasped, a moment of clarity in the storm. "Run. Can't control." She shook her head fiercely, pressing her forehead to his. If she could just push enough magic into him, maybe she could buy them time. Maybe she could... A hand gripped her shoulder, yanking her back. Lord Mortavius stood over her, his face a mask of false concern. "Seize the witch," he commanded. "She's killing our king with dark magic." "No!" Caldros stepped forward. "She was helping..." "Look at him," Mortavius interrupted, gesturing to Calethorn, who lay unconscious, shadows still writhing across his skin. "She's clearly cast some spell. Lock her in the dungeons until we can determine the truth." Guards moved uncertainly toward her. Lyricel looked desperately at Caldros, but his face was torn between loyalty to his king and the clear magical display he'd witnessed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "It's for your own protection as much as anything. Until the king wakes. If he wakes," hung unspoken in the air. They dragged her away, her last sight of Calethorn's still form surrounded by shadows and ice. The dungeon cell was cold, damp, and dark. They'd taken everything, even her simple dress replaced with rough prisoner's garb. She could hear dripping water somewhere in the distance and the occasional scurry of rats. But worse than the physical discomfort was the magical dampening. The cell was warded against magic use, and she could feel her moonlight gift compressed, caged even tighter than her voice. Without the ability to channel it, the power built inside her like pressure behind a dam. Hours passed, or perhaps days. It was impossible to tell in the unchanging darkness. No one came except a silent guard who pushed bread and water through a slot twice a day. Finally, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Mortavius appeared, torch in hand, his expression triumphant. "The king remains unconscious," he informed her. "The healers say if he doesn't wake within the next day, he never will." "How convenient that you'll be blamed for his death." She glared at him, seeing clearly now what she'd only suspected. He wanted the throne, had probably been feeding the curse somehow, accelerating its progress. "Oh, don't look so surprised," he said, moving closer to the bars. "Did you think your little light show went unnoticed? I know exactly what you are, last daughter of Moonwood. Your mother screamed your true name as she died. I was there, you see. My father's blade that ended her, but I struck the first blow." Rage flooded through her, hot and violent. Her magic surged against its constraints, making the wardstones in the walls crack slightly. Mortavius stepped back, his smile widening. "There it is, that legendary Moonwood power. Too bad you'll never get to use it. Tomorrow at dawn, you'll burn as a witch. The king will die of his curse, and I'll reluctantly take the throne to maintain stability. Zorinthia will make a lovely queen, don't you think?" He left her with that image, and she sank to the floor, despair overwhelming her. She had failed Calethorn, failed her mother's sacrifice, failed herself. But as she sat in the darkness, she remembered something her mother had said in those final moments. "The vow I place on you can be broken only by absolute need and perfect love. When you find the one whose darkness calls to your light, you'll know it's time." Calethorn's darkness. Her light. two halves of an ancient balance, just as she'd suspected. She pressed her palms against the ward stones, not trying to break through but to understand them. They were shadow magic, she realized, the same type that fed the curse. And shadow magic had one weakness her mother had made sure she knew. It could not stand against willing sacrifice. She began to prepare, gathering her power not to escape, but for one final gambit. If she was going to die tomorrow, she'd make sure her death meant something. Dawn came too quickly. Guards hauled her from the cell, her legs barely supporting her after days of confinement. They dragged her to the courtyard where a pyre had been erected. The entire court assembled to witness justice. Calethorn was there, propped on a throne, more dead than alive. His skin was gray as ash, his breathing barely visible. Someone had dressed him in royal regalia, but it only emphasized how far gone he was. Mortavius stood before the crowd, voice carrying clearly. "We gather to witness the execution of a witch who attempted to assassinate our king through dark magic. Let her death cleanse this evil from our midst." They bound her to the stake, the ropes cutting into her wrists. She looked across the courtyard at Calethorn, pouring all her love, her sorrow, her determination into that gaze. His eyelids fluttered. For just a moment, storm-gray eyes met hers, confused and pained. The executioner approached with his torch. Now or never. Lyricel drew in the deepest breath of her life, pulling on every drop of magic in her blood, and spoke for the first time in 20 years. Her voice rang out clear as silver bells, carrying the power of the moonlight itself. "I am Lyricel Moonwood, last of the silver line, and I name Calethorn Shadowmere as my true mate." The words shattered the morning air like breaking glass. Every person in the courtyard froze, even the executioner's torch hovering forgotten in his hand. But it was the magical shockwave that followed that sent them to their knees. Silver light exploded from Lyricel, not the gentle glow from before, but a supernova of pure moonlight magic. The ropes binding her disintegrated. The pyre beneath her feet transformed, dead wood sprouting leaves and silver flowers. The very air sang with power not seen for a generation. Mortavius stumbled backward, his face contorting from shock to rage to fear in rapid succession. "Moonwood," he spat. "Impossible. We killed them all." "You missed one," Lyricel said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the stones themselves vibrate. Each word was a note in a greater song, the healing music her bloodline was famous for. Hidden by a mother's dying vow, protected by silence, waiting for this moment. She stepped down from the transformed pyre, silver light trailing from her like a cloak. The guards who moved to stop her found their weapons turned to flowers in their hands, their armor sprouting vines. But her attention was entirely on Calethorn. He was sitting upright now, his eyes wide with shock and something else. Hope. "You spoke," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You broke your vow. They'll come for you now, all of them." "Let them come," she said, approaching his throne. "I'm done hiding." She could see the curse fighting her presence, shadows writhing more violently across his skin. But now she understood. It wasn't trying to attack her. It was trying to protect him from the pain of hope, from the possibility of salvation that might be snatched away. "The Moonwood line is extinct," Mortavius said loudly, addressing the crowd. "This is a trick, an impostor using forbidden magic to—" "You know I'm real," Lyricel interrupted, turning to face him. "You recognized my mother's power in me. That's why you've been accelerating Calethorn's curse, isn't it? You sensed what I was, and knew I was the only threat to your plan." Gasps rippled through the assembled nobles. Caldro stepped forward, hand on his sword. "Explain," he commanded Mortavius. "She's lying," Mortavius snarled, but sweat beaded on his forehead. "The witch seeks to divide us." "Then you won't mind submitting to truth-speaking," Lyricel said. She began to hum, a low, thrumming note that made the air shimmer. "It's one of my bloodline's gifts, compelling honesty through song." Mortavius's mouth opened against his will. "I've been feeding the curse with shadowroot poison in the king's wine for months," he blurted, then clamped his hands over his mouth in horror. The crowd erupted. Guards moved toward Mortavius, but he pulled a blade from his robes, the same twisted dagger that had killed Lyricel's mother, she realized with a start. "If I cannot have the throne through succession," he snarled, "I'll take it by force." He lunged not at Lyricel but at Calethorn, knowing the king was too weak to defend himself. Lyricel moved without thinking, throwing herself between them. The blade meant for Calethorn's heart pierced her shoulder instead, and she cried out. Her first sound of pain in 20 years. Her blood, silver bright with moonlight magic, splattered across Calethorn's face and hands. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Calethorn roared, the sound shaking the entire castle. He erupted from his throne, the curse and the moonlight magic suddenly, violently united in his fury. Shadows and silver light swirled around him in a devastating maelstrom. "You dare!" he snarled at Mortavius, who stumbled backward in terror. "You dare harm what is mine?" "I was trying to save the kingdom from you," Mortavius screamed. "The curse will consume everything. The only thing being consumed here is you." Calethorn raised his hand, and shadows responded. But not the twisted, corrupted shadows of the curse. These were clean, sharp, precise. Shadow as it was meant to be, balanced with light, working in harmony rather than opposition. Mortavius tried to run. The shadows caught him, wrapping around his limbs like chains. But it was Lyricel who ended it, her voice rising in a song of judgment that stripped away his magical protections, leaving him vulnerable to justice. "For the murder of Queen Oriah Moonwood," she sang, each word a hammer blow. "For the attempted murder of King Calethorn, for treason against the crown and crimes against the natural order, you are condemned." The shadows tightened. Mortavius had time for one final scream before he dissolved into nothingness, leaving only the echo of his malice behind. Silence fell over the courtyard. Then Lyricel swayed, the dagger still embedded in her shoulder, her silver blood pooling at her feet. Calethorn caught her as she fell, his face twisted with anguish. "No," he breathed, pressing his hands to the wound. "No, you can't. I just found you." She lifted a trembling hand to his face. "Had to," she whispered, her voice already fading. "Had to save you. My mate. My choice." "Then choose to live," he commanded, but his voice broke on the words. "Please, Lyricel. I can't do this without you. The curse." "Look," she breathed, and he did. The curse was changing. Where her blood had touched him, the shadow veins were transforming. Not disappearing, but shifting into something new. Shadow and moonlight intertwined, neither consuming the other but creating something unprecedented. "We're not opposites," she realized aloud, understanding flooding through her even as her strength faded. "We're complementary. Two halves of Dash Dash." Her eyes rolled back, and she went limp in his arms. Lyricel drifted in and out of consciousness, caught between waking and dreams. Sometimes she felt cold hands on her face, heard desperate voices commanding her to fight. Other times she floated in silver light, her mother's voice singing lullabies from childhood. You've done well, my daughter, Araya's spirit whispered. But your work isn't finished. He needs you. The kingdom needs you. The balance must be maintained. I'm tired, Lyricel replied in the dream space. The blade was poisoned. I can feel it eating at me. Then stop fighting alone, her mother said gently. You have a mate now, bonded in blood and choice, if not yet in ceremony. Draw on his strength as he draws on yours. Lyricel woke gasping, her shoulder burning with fever. She was in an unfamiliar room. No, not unfamiliar. This was the royal chambers, she realized. Calethorn's private sanctuary, where no one but the king was permitted. He was there, slumped in a chair beside the enormous bed, his hand wrapped around hers. Even in sleep, he looked haggard. Dark circles under his eyes, several days' worth of stubble, clothes unchanged and rumpled. But the curse was different. The shadow veins were still there, but they pulsed with silver now, creating patterns like moonlight through tree branches. Beautiful, rather than terrible. She squeezed his hand weakly. His eyes snapped open, immediately alert. Lyricel, he breathed, leaning forward. Thank the goddess. You've been unconscious for 5 days. The healers said. He swallowed hard. They said the poison was beyond their skill, that only ancient magic could. She pressed a finger to his lips, silencing him. Help me sit up, she whispered, her voice still rough from disuse. He supported her carefully, piling pillows behind her back. She could see the restraint it took not to crush her against him, the desperate need for contact warring with fear of causing pain. The kingdom? She asked. In chaos, he admitted. Mortavius had supporters who fled when he died. Zorinthia tried to claim I was compromised, that a moonwood controlling the Shadow King would mean destruction. He smiled grimly. Kaldros challenged her to single combat on my behalf. She's currently recovering from several broken ribs and a shattered ego. You didn't fight yourself? I couldn't leave you. The simple statement carried so much weight she felt tears prick her eyes. Besides, the curse, it's changing. I can feel it, Lyricel. For the first time in my life, the cold isn't consuming. It's just part of me, balanced. She studied him, noting the healthier color in his cheeks, the clarity in his eyes. We need to complete the bond, she said softly. The healing won't hold otherwise. My bloodline's magic requires. I know. He lifted their joined hands and she saw the silver scar across his palm, a mate's mark, partially formed. Your blood on my skin started it. But to finish it, we need the ceremony, the vows, the. He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. The acceptance has to be mutual. Real. Not just magical necessity, but choice. You think I chose to reveal myself? To break a 20-year vow? To take a poisoned blade for magical necessity? She freed her good hand to cup his cheek. Calethorn Shadowmere, I have loved you since the moment you stood against that crowd for me. Every night you came to the library, every small kindness, every moment you fought your nature to protect me. I was already yours. He turned his face into her palm, pressing a kiss there that sent warmth through her entire body. And I've been yours since you first took my hand. My wolf knew, even if my mind resisted. He met her eyes, storm gray now threaded with silver. But you should know what you're binding yourself to. The curse may be balanced now, but it's still there. Our children will carry it. The kingdom will always fear. Our children will carry moonlight and shadow both, she interrupted. The first truly balanced rulers in 300 years. As for the kingdom's fear. She smiled. Let them see their king's strength tempered with a queen's compassion. Let them understand that darkness and light need not be enemies. He studied her for a long moment, then stood, helping her carefully to her feet. Then we do this properly. Despite her protests about her injury, he insisted on sending for proper attire. Within hours, she stood in a gown of silver and midnight blue, the moonwood crest, hidden for so long, embroidered proudly on the bodice. Calethorn wore his royal regalia, but threaded through with silver now, acknowledging the change in him. The throne room had been transformed. Where before only cold stone and shadows reigned, now moonflowers bloomed, their petals glowing softly. The assembled court watched with a mixture of awe and trepidation as their king led his chosen queen to the dais. Caldros stood as witness, bearing the ceremonial bonds, not chains but ribbons of shadow and light intertwined. The symbolism was clear. This was not binding but joining. "Speak your name for all to hear," Calethorn commanded gently. Lyricel's voice rang out, carrying the full power of her heritage. "I am Lyricel Moonwood, last heir of the Silver Throne, keeper of the healing song, daughter of queens who sang the world toward light." "And I am Calethorn Shadowmere," he responded, his voice harmonizing with hers in a way that made the very air shiver. "Born of shadow, keeper of ancient pacts, son of kings who shape the darkness into strength." "Do you accept the bond?" Caldros asked formally. "Knowing it cannot be broken, that your souls will be entwined through this life and all that follow?" "I accept," they said in unison. The ribbons wound around their joined hands and Lyricel began to sing. Not words, but pure music, the healing song her mother had hummed as she died, the song that had been building in her throat for 20 years. Calethorn responded not with song but with something deeper, a thrumming that seemed to come from the earth itself, shadows dancing to her melody, creating harmony from what had always been discord. The magic that erupted from their union knocked everyone in the throne room to their knees. It raced through the castle, through the city, across the kingdom itself. Where it passed, long-dead gardens bloomed with night-blooming flowers. Shadows that had been harsh became soft, providing comfort rather than fear. The eternal winter that had gripped the northern provinces for decades finally broke, giving way to a gentle spring. When the magic settled, Lyricel and Calethorn stood transformed. Her hair now bore streaks of shadow black through its gold. His eyes held permanent flecks of silver. Most remarkably, where their hands touched, small flowers bloomed, shadow roses with silver-touched petals, impossible and beautiful. "Rise," Calethorn commanded the court, and they did, looking upon their transformed rulers with wonder. "Let it be known that the age of division ends today. Shadow and light, Moonwood and Shadowmere are one." The first challenge came within a week. Lord Aldrich of the Eastern Marches arrived with a contingent of warriors, claiming that the contamination of royal blood with Moonwood magic violated ancient law. He demanded that Calethorn step down or face civil war. Lyricel watched from her throne, still strange to think of it as hers, as Aldrich strutted into the throne room like he owned it. He was everything the old regime had valued, brutal, traditionalist, convinced that might alone made right. "You've been bewitched," Aldrich declared, pointing at Calethorn. "No true Shadow King would dilute his bloodline with that moonlight poison. I challenge your fitness to rule." "Accepted," Calethorn said mildly, rising from his throne. "No," Lyricel said, standing as well. Everyone turned to stare at her. "Lord Aldrich questions my place here, not yours. Therefore, I will answer his challenge." Aldrich laughed. "You? A woman who spent 20 years mute? You think to fight me? I think to show you something you've forgotten, she replied, descending the dais steps with fluid grace. Power isn't always about physical strength. The great hall was cleared for combat. Aldrich drew his sword, a massive two-handed blade enchanted with shadow magic. Lyricel carried no weapon, only her voice, and the silver light that danced beneath her skin. Begin, Caldros called. Aldrich charged immediately, bringing his sword down in an arc that would have split her in half, but Lyricel sang a single note, and his blade turned to silver dust, the enchantments unraveling at her command. He stumbled, off balance, and she touched his shoulder gently. Moonlight flooded through him, but not as an attack. Instead, it showed him memories she pulled from his mind and made manifest for all to see. A young Aldrich, terrified as his father beat him for showing weakness. Aldrich weeping over his son's grave, the boy dead from a plague the Moonwood healers could have cured if they hadn't been extinct. Aldrich's wife leaving him because his adherence to tradition left no room for love. This is what the old ways brought you, Lyricel said softly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Pain, loss, loneliness. The shadow was never meant to stand alone, just as the moonlight needs darkness to define it. Aldrich fell to his knees, tears streaming down his weathered face. My son, he choked out, if the healers had been there. I cannot bring back the dead, Lyricel said gently, kneeling beside him. But I can ensure no other parent suffers that loss. She began to sing again, this time a healing song that drew out the poison of old grief, old rage, old fear. When she finished, Aldrich looked up at her with wonder. You could have destroyed me. Why show mercy? Because mercy is not weakness, Calethorn said, approaching them. It's the strength to choose healing over harm, something I'm still learning from my queen. Aldrich bowed his head. I withdraw my challenge, and I pledge my eastern marches to the United Crown. It was the first of many such challenges, each one ending not in blood but in understanding. Word spread quickly, the silent queen who could sing truth into being, the shadow king whose darkness now sheltered rather than consumed. But not everyone was convinced by displays of mercy. 3 months after their bonding ceremony, an assassin struck. Lyricel was in the library, their library now, though Calethorn had gifted it to her officially, when she felt the temperature drop unnaturally. A figure in black materialized from the shadows, blade already swinging toward her throat. She had a split second to react, throwing herself backward and singing a note of warning that echoed through the castle. The assassin was skilled, trained specifically to counter Moonwood magic. They wore enchanted armor that absorbed her silver light, wielded weapons that disrupted her songs. This was no random attacker but someone prepared specifically for her. She dodged another strike, her voice rising in a battle hymn her mother had taught her in dreams. Books flew from their shelves, forming a barrier between her and her attacker. But the assassin cut through them, relentless in pursuit. A wound opened across her ribs, another on her thigh. Her blood painted the floor silver, and she stumbled, her song faltering. The assassin raised their blade for the killing blow and froze solid. Not metaphorically, literally frozen in a block of ice so cold it steamed in the air. Calethorn stood in the doorway, his face a mask of fury so complete it made the temperature drop another 10 degrees. Shadows writhed around him like living things, but threaded through with silver now. Her influence on his curse making it stronger, more controlled. Did you think, he said, his voice deadly quiet, that I wouldn't feel my mate's distress? That I wouldn't come? He walked forward, ice spreading from his footsteps. The assassin's eyes, the only thing that could move, widened in terror. You're going to tell me who sent you, Calethorn continued. You're going to tell me everything. And then, if I'm feeling merciful, I'll give you to my queen to judge. If not. The ice around the assassin's throat tightened fractionally. Well, ice can preserve a body for a very long time. Long enough to feel every second of dying. Calethorn, Lyricel said softly, pressing a hand to her wounded side. Don't let the darkness take you. Not for me. He turned to her, and she saw the struggle in his eyes. The old curse wanting to rampage, to destroy everything that threatened what was his. But the silver threads held it in check, her light keeping him balanced even in his rage. He took a breath, then another. The ice around the assassin receded slightly, enough to allow speech. The Northern Conclave, the assassin gasped. They sent me. They say the Moonwood line must end permanently, that your children will bring about the apocalypse predicted in the old texts. What texts? Lyricel demanded, approaching despite her injuries. The prophecy of the eclipse, the assassin said. When shadow and moonlight unite in blood, their offspring will either save the world or end it. Calethorn and Lyricel exchanged glances. Neither had heard of such a prophecy, but that didn't mean it didn't exist. You're going to take us to this conclave, Calethorn decided. They want to meet the monsters they fear? Let them. The journey north took 3 weeks, even with their enhanced abilities. The Northern Conclave had hidden itself well, deep in the frozen wastes where even shadows feared to tread. Only their assassin-turned-guide could navigate the secret paths. Lyricel rode beside Calethorn, her injuries healed but the memory of vulnerability lingering. Around them rode a mixed guard, shadow warriors loyal to Calethorn and moon-touched healers who had emerged from hiding after learning of Lyricel's survival. You're brooding again, she observed on their 10th night, sitting beside him at their campfire. I nearly lost you, he replied, not looking away from the flames. 3 months of marriage and already assassination attempts. What happens when you're pregnant? When you can't defend yourself as easily? She laughed, surprising him. You think pregnancy will make me helpless? My mother fought off 12 assassins while in labor with me. Moonwood women don't become delicate flowers when with child. We become forces of nature. He turned to study her, firelight playing across his features. You want children, even knowing about this prophecy. I want your children, she corrected. Shadowborn and moon-blessed, probably terrifying and definitely powerful. The prophecy speaks of choice, salvation or destruction. We'll raise them to choose wisely. He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. How are you so certain? So unafraid? Because I spent 20 years afraid, she answered. 20 years silent, hidden, alone. I'm done with fear. We're writing a new story, Calethorn. One where shadow and light dance together instead of fight. Their assassin guide, who'd reluctantly given his name as Marcus, spoke up from across the fire. You really believe that? That you can change centuries of hatred? We already have, Caldros pointed out. He'd insisted on leading their guard personally. The eastern marches, the riverlands, even parts of the western desert have declared for the United Crown. Only the Northern Conclave holds out. Because they know the full prophecy, Marcus said quietly. Not just the part about children, but what comes before. The joining of bloodlines will wake the ancient ones, the first shadows and the primal light. They will judge if this unity is abomination or evolution. Silence fell over the camp. Even the fire seemed to dim at the mention of the ancient ones, beings that existed in the time before time, when magic was raw and untamed. When? Lyricel asked. When are they supposed to wake? The prophecy says, when the first child quickens in the womb, Marcus replied. That's why the conclave wanted you dead before you could conceive. Once you're pregnant, it becomes inevitable. Lyricel's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, and Calethorn caught the gesture. His eyes widened. Lyricel. She met his gaze steadily. I wasn't certain. But I've been feeling different. Stronger in some ways, more vulnerable in others. I was going to wait until we returned to confirm with the healers, but... You're pregnant, he breathed, wonder and terror warring in his voice. Marcus went very pale. Then we're too late. The Ancient Ones will already be stirring. As if in response to his words, the ground beneath them trembled. In the distance, a mountain that had been dormant for millennia began to glow with an eerie light, half silver, half shadow. How long do we have? Kaldros demanded. The prophecy says 9 months, Marcus replied, the length of a pregnancy. The Ancient Ones will fully wake when the child is born. That's when they'll render judgment. Then we have 9 months to prove that our unity is evolution, not abomination, Lyricel said firmly. 9 months to show the Ancient Ones that shadow and light can create something greater than either alone. And if we fail? Calethorn asked, though he already knew the answer. Then both bloodlines end, Marcus said simply, along with all magic in the world. The Northern Conclave's hidden city was carved from ice and shadowstone, beautiful in its austerity. The guards at the gates nearly attacked when they recognized Lyricel, but Calethorn's presence, and the obvious change in his curse, gave them pause. They were escorted to the council chamber, where 5 ancient figures sat in judgment. These were the oldest of the old blood, survivors from the time when Moonwood and Shadowmere first split into opposing forces. So, the central figure, a woman whose hair was white as fresh snow, spoke first. The abomination comes to us willingly. The evolution, Lyricel corrected calmly, and we come seeking understanding, not conflict. You carry an impossibility in your womb. Another counselor, his skin bearing shadow marks like tattoos, snarled. A child that should not exist. Why? Calethorn demanded. Because your traditions say so? Because you've forgotten that shadow and light once worked together? The white-haired woman, Elder Celine, Marcus whispered, stood slowly. You don't understand. We don't maintain the separation out of hatred but out of necessity. When shadow and light unite fully, they create something neither can control. The last time it happened. She waved her hand, and the ice walls became transparent, showing images from the past. A great city, grander than anything in the current world, where shadow workers and light singers lived in harmony. Then a child born of both bloodlines, power beyond measure coursing through their veins. The images shifted, showing destruction. The child, grown to adulthood, had lost control. Shadow and light warring within them had torn the city apart, created the frozen wastes, split the bloodlines forever. That was my ancestor, Elder Celine said quietly. I watched my brother destroy everything we'd built because the power was too much for any one being to contain. The Ancient Ones decreed then that the bloodlines must remain separate or risk the world's destruction. But you separated completely, Lyricel argued. No balance, no harmony. Look what that led to. Genocides, curses, endless war. Maybe your brother fell because he had no one to understand him, no one to help him balance. You think you're different? The shadow-marked counselor scoffed. You think your love will be enough? We think our understanding might be, Calethorn said. Your brother was alone. Our child won't be. They'll have both of us. and a kingdom learning to balance shadow and light. Elder Selene studied them for a long moment. You truly believe you can change the outcome? We have to, Lyricel said simply. The Ancient Ones are already waking. If we're going to be judged regardless, we might as well try to tip the scales toward evolution rather than extinction. There is another part of the prophecy, Elder Selene admitted reluctantly. A trial. If the united pair can pass 3 tests before the child's birth, the Ancient Ones might judge favorably. What tests? Calethorn asked immediately. We don't know. The prophecy only says they'll come at the trimester marks, 3rd month, 6th month, and 9th month. Each test will be harder than the last, and failure at any point means... She trailed off. Death, Marcus supplied helpfully. We'll face them, Lyricel said without hesitation. Together. Elder Selene sighed deeply. Then the conclave will not oppose you. We'll even provide what aid we can. But know this. If you fail, if your child becomes the destroyer the prophecy warns of, we will do what must be done. Understood, Calethorn said, taking Lyricel's hand. But we won't fail. As they left the chamber, the mountain in the distance pulsed with light again, and a voice seemed to echo across the wasteland, ancient, patient, and utterly inhuman. The first trial begins at the new moon. Prove that unity brings strength, not weakness. 3 weeks. They had 3 weeks to prepare for whatever the Ancient Ones would throw at them. The new moon rose invisible in the dark sky, and with it came the trial. Lyricel woke to find herself alone in a place that wasn't quite real. The landscape shifted between shadow and light, unstable, constantly changing. She could feel Calethorn somewhere in this strange realm but couldn't reach him. First trial, a voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. Strength comes from standing alone or standing together. Prove your truth. The landscape solidified into 2 paths. On the left, bathed in silver light, stood her mother. Not a memory or illusion, but somehow truly her, pulled from whatever realm the dead inhabited. My daughter, Aurea said, tears streaming down her face. I've missed you so much. Come, let me hold you. Let me teach you the songs I never could. On the right, shrouded in shadow, stood Calethorn's father, the late King Aldwin, his face free of the curse's corruption. Son, he called, though Lyricel could hear him too. I can teach you to master the shadows without the curse. You could be the king I never could be. Lyricel understood immediately. They were being offered their deepest desires, connection with lost parents, knowledge that had been denied them. But accepting meant choosing the past over the future, separation over unity. She took a step backward instead of forward, reaching with her senses for Calethorn. She could feel him facing the same choice, the same temptation. Together, she whispered, knowing somehow he would hear. We choose together. She began to sing, not a moonwood healing song, but something new, a melody that incorporated the shadow's rhythm she'd learned from Calethorn. He responded. She could feel it, adding his voice to hers in a harmony that had never existed before. The 2 paths shuddered, then merged, creating a 3rd way forward. Their parents' figures smiled sadly but proudly as they faded. You would have made them proud, Aurea whispered as she disappeared. Both of you, Aldwin added, his voice carrying approval his living self had never expressed. The landscape solidified into a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. Lyricel and Calethorn stood at opposite ends, finally able to see each other. But the bridge was narrow, treacherous, and beginning to crumble. Only one can cross safely. the ancient voice declared. Choose who survives. Neither, they said in unison, stepping onto the bridge simultaneously. It cracked under their combined weight, pieces falling into the void below. But they didn't stop, moving toward each other with absolute faith. Where Laricel stepped, moonlight reinforced the structure. Where Calethorn placed his feet, shadows wove new supports. They met in the middle just as the last of the original bridge fell away, standing on a construction of pure merged magic, silver and shadow intertwined, stronger than either alone. Interesting, the ancient voice mused. You reject the premise of the test itself. We reject the idea that strength means standing alone, Laricel said firmly, or that survival requires choosing one over the other. The old ways demand sacrifice, the voice pressed. One must fall for the other to rise. Then we'll make new ways, Calethorn replied, his arm around Liricel's waist. Ways where both can rise together. The void around them shimmered, and suddenly they were back in their bedchamber, dawnlight streaming through the windows. But something had changed. Where their skin touched, small sparks of combined magic danced. Not painful, but energizing, like their very beings were learning to resonate together. One trial down, Laricel said, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. 2 to go. But even as she spoke, she felt something new. Their child's first movement, too early by normal standards but unmistakable. A flutter of power that was neither shadow nor light, but something entirely unprecedented. They're strong, Calethorn murmured in wonder, his hand covering hers. I can feel them. Them? Laricel looked up sharply. He nodded slowly. 2 heartbeats. 2 souls. Twins. The prophecy hadn't mentioned twins. No one had considered the possibility of not one child of united bloodlines, but 2. This changes things, Laricel said softly. This changes everything, Calethorn agreed. News of the twins spread quickly, dividing the kingdom further. Some saw it as double the blessing, others as double the threat. The Northern Conclave sent daily messages asking for updates, their fear palpable even through written words. But Laricel and Calethorn had more immediate concerns. The pregnancy was advancing faster than normal, and with it came unexpected challenges. Liricel's morning sickness involved accidentally turning objects to silver when she coughed. Calethorn's protective instincts manifested as shadows that followed her everywhere, occasionally attacking servants who moved too quickly in her presence. You have to stop freezing the tea service, Laricel told him one morning after the 3rd tray had to be thawed. You have to stop singing in your sleep, he countered. You healed my old training injuries, but you also made all the furniture sprout flowers. They looked around their flower-covered, partially frozen bedroom and burst out laughing. It was absurd, all of it, but also wonderful. 3 months passed quicker than expected. The 2nd trial came with the full moon, this time pulling them both into the strange realm together. They stood in an arena made of starlight and void, facing mirror versions of themselves, but wrong. Liricel's double was pure, blinding light that burned everything it touched. Calethorn's was absolute darkness that devoured all warmth. 2nd trial, the ancient voice announced. Face what you could become without each other. The light Liricel attacked first, her song a shriek that shattered the air itself. She was power without compassion, healing turned to harm, every note a weapon. The shadow Calethorn moved like living nightmare, cold, so absolute it didn't just freeze but erased, shadows that didn't shelter but suffocated. This is what the Conclave fears, Laricel realized, dodging her double's assault. What we could become if the balance fails. Then we don't let it fail, Calethorn replied, but his double was pressing him hard and ice was spreading across his skin, the old curse trying to reassert itself. They were losing. Their doubles were stronger, untethered by conscience or control. Pure power without restraint. Wait, Lyricel called out, an idea forming. We're fighting them separately. That's the point. Apart, we become monsters. She broke away from her double, running toward Calethorn instead. He understood immediately, moving to meet her. Their doubles followed, light and shadow racing to stop them. At the last second, Lyricel and Calethorn clasped hands and turned to face their doubles together. The false versions collided with them and passed through, striking each other instead. Light and shadow met in an explosion that should have destroyed everything. But Lyricel and Calethorn held tight to each other, their combined magic creating a shelter in the storm. When the chaos cleared, their doubles were gone. In their place stood a figure made of perfectly balanced silver and shadow, what their children might become if raised right. Better, the ancient voice acknowledged, but the hardest trial remains. At the birth you must choose, power or peace, greatness or goodness. The fate of magic itself will rest in your hands. They were returned to reality, both. We're returned to reality, both shaken by what they'd seen and what lay ahead. The final months of pregnancy were intense. The twins' power grew daily, sometimes overwhelming their parents. One morning, Lyricel woke to find everything in their room perfectly split. Half an eternal night, half an eternal day, with a thin line down the middle where the twins' influences met. "They're already so strong," she whispered, hands on her swollen belly. "What if we can't—" "We will," Calethorn interrupted, though she could see his own doubts. "We have to." The court was increasingly divided. Some nobles fled, fearing what the birth might bring. Others arrived from distant lands, drawn by curiosity or ambition. The Northern Conclave set up permanent residence in the capital, ready to act if the worst came to pass. Elder Celine visited often, her ancient eyes watching Lyricel with a mixture of hope and dread. "The power signatures are unlike anything in our records," she admitted one evening. "Your children will either herald a new age or end the current one." "No pressure," Lyricel said dryly, then winced as one of the twins kicked particularly hard. "They're restless tonight." "They sense the approach," Celine said quietly. "The 9th month draws near." Indeed, it came faster than expected. On the night of the eclipse, of course it would be an eclipse, Lyricel's labor began. But this was no ordinary birth. As the first contractions hit, the very fabric of reality began to thin. The Ancient Ones were coming, ready to witness and judge. The birthing chamber became a nexus point between worlds. Shadows writhed on the walls while silver light poured from above. The temperature fluctuated wildly, freezing one moment, burning the next. "Everyone out," Calethorn commanded, but Lyricel grabbed his hand. "You stay," she gasped between contractions. "We face this together." The room shifted, becoming the same strange realm where they'd faced their trials, but now it was filled with presences, ancient, vast, incomprehensible. The Ancient Ones had come to witness. "The final trial," their collective voice echoed. "As your children enter the world, you must choose their nature. Will they be gods among mortals, reshaping the world with their power? Or will they be bridges, showing others the path to balance? Power or peace? Greatness or goodness? Choose." Another contraction hit, and Lyricel saw it clearly. 2 paths for their children. In one, The twins grew to become the most powerful beings ever known, ruling with benevolent but absolute authority, their magic keeping peace through strength. In the other, they became teachers, showing others how to find the balance within themselves, spreading the unity their parents had discovered but never forcing it. Power corrupts, Lyricel gasped, even benevolent power. But without strength, they'll be vulnerable, Calethorn argued, his protective instincts screaming. The world will try to use them or destroy them. Then we teach them to be strong without being dominant, Lyricel said. To lead by example, not force. The Ancient Ones pressed closer. Choose. We choose, Lyricel and Calethorn said in unison, to let them choose. Silence fell. Even Lyricel's labor pains paused. Explain, the Ancient Ones demanded. We won't shape their destiny before they're even born, Calethorn said firmly. We'll teach them balance, show them both paths, and when they're ready, they'll choose for themselves. That's not, the Ancient Ones began. That's the point, Lyricel interrupted, then cried out as the labor resumed with devastating intensity. You keep demanding choices between extremes, light or dark, power or peace, one or the other. But we've proven repeatedly that the answer is both. Balance. Our children will have both options, and the wisdom to choose neither extreme. The Ancient One's presence flickered, uncertain for the first time. Then the first twin crowned, and power exploded through the room. A girl born with eyes of silver-shot shadow, her first cry a harmony of light and dark that made the very walls sing. The second followed moments later, a boy with shadow-dark hair but skin that glowed with inner moonlight. His cry was deeper, a thrumming that resonated in the bones. As Lyricel held them, exhausted but triumphant, and Calethorn wrapped his arms around all three of them, something unprecedented happened. The twins' magic, instead of clashing, synchronized. They reached for each other with tiny hands, and where they touched, that same balanced magic their parents had discovered bloomed, but stronger, purer, born into it rather than finding it. Impossible, the Ancient Ones breathed. They're naturally balanced, neither light nor dark dominant. Not impossible, Lyricel corrected softly, looking at her children with wonder. Evolved. This is what happens when unity is chosen from the start, not forced later. The Ancient Ones were silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, their presence began to retreat. The trial is complete, they announced. The children are approved. Magic will not end today. But know this. They will be tested, as you were. The world will challenge them, fear them, try to divide them. Then we'll teach them what we learned, Calethorn said. That together, they're stronger than any force that tries to tear them apart. We shall watch, the Ancient One said, and then they were gone, leaving only a normal birthing chamber with 2 exhausted parents and 2 extraordinary infants. Luna! Shadow Song! Get down from there right now! Lyricel's voice carried across the courtyard where her 10-year-old twins had somehow managed to climb the castle's highest tower using a combination of shadow walking and light jumping. But Mother, Luna called down, her silver eyes sparkling with mischief, we can see the whole kingdom from here. And we're perfectly safe, Shadow Song added, his form flickering between solid and shadow. Father taught us to always have an escape route. I taught you that for emergencies, Calethorn said, appearing beside his wife, not for giving your mother premature gray hairs. The twins looked at each other, had one of their silent conversations that drove everyone crazy, then simultaneously jumped off the tower. Lyricel's heart stopped, even though she knew they'd be fine. Luna dissolved into moonlight halfway down, reforming gently on the ground. Shadow Song became shadow, sliding down the tower's wall like liquid darkness. Show-offs, Kaldros muttered from where he was training the new guards, a mixed unit of shadow warriors and moon healers, the first of its kind. They get it from their father, Lyricel said, nudging Calethorn. The showing off, maybe, he agreed. The talent for driving their parents to distraction? That's all you. They watched their children run off to their next adventure, probably to terrorize their tutors or charm the kitchen staff into extra desserts. They were wild, powerful, and occasionally terrifying, but also kind, generous, and fiercely protective of each other and anyone they considered family. The kingdom had changed dramatically in 10 years. What had started as a forced unity had become genuine integration. Shadow and light workers learned from each other, created new magic together. The old prejudices weren't gone. That would take generations. But they were fading. The Northern Conclave sent another letter, Calethorn said quietly. They want to test the twins again. Let them come, Lyricel replied. Luna will probably turn their robes into butterfly wings, and Shadow Song will convince them to stay for tea. Remember when we thought they'd be the destruction of everything? Remember when we thought we would be? They stood together, watching the sun set over their kingdom, their balanced, imperfect, wonderful kingdom. Shadows lengthened as the moon began to rise, and for a moment, everything was in perfect harmony. Mother! Father! Luna's voice carried from inside. Shadow ate all the dessert again. Did not! You turned it invisible so I'd get blamed. Children, Lyricel sighed, but she was smiling. Our children, Calethorn corrected, pulling her close. Our terrifying, magnificent, world-changing children. Would you have it any other way? Never, he said, and kissed her as the first stars appeared, shadow and light dancing together in the gathering dusk. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but not in any way the Ancient Ones had foreseen. Not through power or submission, not through separation or dominance, but through choice, balance, and the radical idea that two opposing forces could create something greater than either alone. The age of unity had begun, and it started with two children who knew no other way to be than together, balanced and whole. In the highest tower, a silver wolf and a shadow raven watched over the kingdom, the spirits of Oriah and Aldwin, finally at peace, guarding their grandchildren and the new world they would build. The curse was broken, the bloodlines were united, and the real story, the story of what came next, was just beginning.